All right, Exodus 29, let's call this one holy. Why? Because even though I generally try to stay away from holier than thou sounding language, sometimes it's good to just take a word that seems inaccessible that the Bible literally uses and help us understand how it actually fits terms that we use today. And so when I was looking at this chapter, the term holy came up and it reminded me of being on the court, the basketball court, with a few young men last week. Two of them were really good, and there was a third who was in a lot of ways curious about how you could get to their level. And he said that, I can't remember exactly what he said, but it seemed to suggest that what one of the young men was doing just seemed natural or effortless. And I looked at him and I said, young man, what that young man is doing in the way of footwork is nothing natural. That young man's a gym rat, and that comes through a lot of not just dedicated effort, but focus, repetition over a long period of time. And that kind of focus really sums up a lot of what the Bible is doing when it talks about being holy or consecrated, as it does in this chapter. See, when I paid that one young man compliment for his footwork, he didn't deny it. He couldn't deny it. That was hard work and it was focus. And even though he was a rec player now, he had clearly been trained and taken it on as his personal responsibility to get in the gym and do the kind of work that it took to be dedicated, focused, and perfect what he was about. And so that is what God is calling his priests to do in this chapter. And is going to, in many ways, help us get that concept clear when it's going to say, beginning in verse 37, 7 days you shall make atonement for the altar and consecrate it, and the altar shall be most holy. Whatever touches the altar shall become holy. Now, he's not talking about the priest at that point, but he's already talked about the priest. The altar is where they're going to make their sacrifices. And it seems odd that a piece of furniture, not to be too disrespectful because this is the tabernacle where God dwells, but a piece of furniture can make things holy just by touching it. But once again, the presence of God in this place is what gives value to everything there. And that is what it's going to remind us of at the end of the chapter when it says in verse 44, I will consecrate the tent of meeting and the altar. Aaron also and his sons I will consecrate to serve me as priests. I will dwell among the people of Israel, and I will be their God, and they shall know that I am the Lord their God, who brought them out of the land of Egypt, that I might dwell among them. I am the Lord their God. That's what it's going to remind them of. And so it is not necessarily that mound of earth or shaped earth or however they chose to make it. They had the option of forming it out of stone as well, as long as they didn't chisel on it. But technicalities aside, the thing that gave value to that furniture was the presence of God. And once the presence of God is there, it's disrespectful to call it just furniture because it is holy. And why is that important? Well, because by the time we get to Jesus's ministry, as he's about to go to the cross, he's going to issue some woes to the leaders of Israel who have lost the value of God's presence in what is now the temple, the permanent structure that replaced the tabernacle. Because by Jesus's day, many began to value the gold on the temple above the temple itself. And likewise, they had begun to value the gifts being placed on the altar above the altar itself. Why? Because gold carried significance to everybody in that day, whether or not you believed in God. And more importantly, they were working in a space where they couldn't take the altar home, but they sure could share in the gifts being placed on the altar. And so it exposed in many ways where their priorities were, exposing the ways in which their valuation of things in life in general had become almost no different than people who didn't believe in God at all, begging the question, why did the unbelievers need to go through them to have a better understanding of God? Wow. I think that's the same question for us. See, the whole concept of a gym rat or being wholly dedicated to a particular cause keeps you not only sharp in terms of your skills, but it keeps you sharp in terms of your focus and your priorities and understanding what really matters, how to value stuff. And so if we have lost our focus, it threatens our ability to provide an alternative to people who are seeking their way out of a drama-filled world. And if we aren't really providing a healthy alternative, then they are right to question whether or not they need our help in finding God, hopefully calling us to reflect on terms like holiness and consecration and how they go to the very core of who we are and whether or not we are providing an effective alternative to everything else they can find around them.